Father God, we just thank you again for just another day, another chance to come together and just worship you and celebrate all that you're doing in our lives. We just thank you for continuing to get us through not just every day, but every week, every month, and every year. And so we just pray that you'll continue to open our hearts to you, continue to pursue living the way you want us to. And Jesus, we just thank you again for not just giving us year after year, but life after life, eternal life until we can just pray that we're really able to see you, lean more on you in this next year, and continue to just seek your love and grace and mercy and the strength to just be able to live every day for you and just for the purpose that God made us for. And so we just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So last week we were talking about Jesus came to give us abundant life. And today we're going to talk about training for abundant life. How are we supposed to grab a hold of it? How are we supposed to live it? And so we're going to be looking at 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 through 10. It's on the handout and on the screens there for you. And so it says, have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. The saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance. For to this end we toil and strive, because we have our hope set on the living God, who is the Savior of all people, especially of those who believe. And so this main part, right, this is a letter that Paul writes to Timothy. This is the leader that he's trained up, but more importantly, he's the leader that he's commissioning to lead the church after Paul's not coming back, right? This is basically when Paul is going to be going away. And so he's trying to give the encouragement to Timothy, but it's an encouragement that we all should have, where it's like we're supposed to train for godliness, right? How many of you guys work out physically? And most of you guys, some people, all right. How many people work out their brains, do challenges, things like that, right? Okay. How many people, the most thing that they train is their spiritual life, right? Yeah, there you go. Not that many, right? And so this is where it's important to understand, right? All those things are good, but training for your spiritual health is the most important thing. That's what actually leads to both. I used to be the strongest person at the church physically, right? Somebody has surpassed me, and that's because that person mostly trains their physical body. I actually train more of my spiritual health, right? And so it's okay. I'm glad I'm second strongest. All right. But as we're talking about this, right, how much do we train for godliness? So last week I gave, in the handout, there was an application that said to spend time worshiping Jesus on Christmas Day, right? I put 7, 8 songs on the handout. I said, spend some time actually worshiping him. How many people did that? Some of you weren't here, right? But only 2 hands. All right. Can you put up the Hebrews 13, 17? I'm going to read this verse for you guys. It says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls. As those who will have to give an account, let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. Based on this scripture, how many of you should have done the worship time? All of you should have, because that's what I told you to do. Does that make sense? And so part of it, as I say this, is kind of funny, but this is the reason why I bring this up is that for most Christians, you guys get messages every week after week, month after month, year after year in your life. And it hits you in that moment, it hits you while you're here, right? But then you don't ever do it while you're at home. You don't ever do something to actually change your old way of living. You don't do anything to change the current lifestyle that you have, the current habits that you have. Does that make sense? And so for so many times, Christians are like, I never change, or I never feel the relief. I never see the difference in my life. I never see Jesus more and more and more. And it's like, well, okay. But there's a reason why. Because we don't have the discipline. We don't say, I need to put these things into practice. I need to try it. Does that make sense? I write them for that reason. You should try it and see how you can add that to your life. That's why I gave my list of songs. But it was like, come up with your own, but do this. Does that make sense? Because if you actually do the step of worshiping, then you'll try to do it more and more and more after you've seen the benefit of it. Does that make sense? And so this is where it said, like for Christians, it's so easy to come and hear the message and see all these applications written over and over and over again. But if we never do it at home, then we're not building up any godliness. Does that make sense? We're not building the discipline. We're not saying I need to grow. All right? And if that's the case, then our life will not become more and more abundant. It's not going to have more faith. It's not going to have all these things that we're pursuing. Does that make sense? And so that's where it says it's a funny thing, but at the same time, it's something to think about. How come we don't ever try the things that we're encouraged to try? Right? I think for Thanksgiving, I gave, I said, spend an hour at night thanking Jesus for every single thing in your life. Try to list out every single thing. Right? And so when I did that, Frank actually did it, and because I told him I just did it the night before, right? And I was up an extra 2 or 3 hours listening to everything that God had done. And so, and I was very moved by it, and God definitely blessed me in that. And so he did it himself. He's like, hey, this is the first time I ever tried an application, right? And he was like, it actually worked. Like, it really helped. Like, it made me change so much of my mindset, change so much of my heart. And I was glad it changed him. I was glad to do it, but that was the funniest thing. It's like, he was being honest, right? You know, that's Frank, right? Frank's going to tell you how it is. But he was like, I finally tried one, and it worked. It hit, right? And so that's where we see, like, why do we not love discipline? Why do we not love this mindset? And so the first point is discipline takes hard work at first. If at first when you're trying to start a discipline, yes, it's hard. But once it's become a pattern, once you love it or once you see the benefit of it, it becomes easier and easier and easier. Paul used those words to toil and strive, right? He's telling Timothy, it's going to be hard work to keep living this way, to train yourself for godliness. But it's going to pay off in this life and the next. And so at this time of year, right, this is the New Year's, everybody does New Year's resolutions, right? Everybody does New Year's resolutions? All right, I heard some from our grads the other day, but I won't say them. But right, every one of us has New Year's resolutions. All right, so this is the research, right, of how people are effective at accomplishing their resolution. So this is off the websites, right? It says, research suggests that only 9% of Americans that make resolutions complete them. In fact, research goes on to show that 23% of people quit their resolutions by the end of the first week. And 43% quit by the end of January. Think about that. Right? Most of you that make resolutions, it's usually something that you want more than anything. Is that fair to say? Right? It's usually something that you are resolving to do because you've experienced pain in the old way of living. You want a new way of living. Right? You're like, I didn't like the way this happened, or I didn't like this outcome, or I didn't like this loss, I didn't like that. Right? So after that pain, you're like, I need to make a change. And yet somehow 9% of you are only going to be able to change your life. Change that pattern. Avoid that pain. Avoid that failure. Only 9% of you. I couldn't find statistics for ABCs. My bad. Right? So maybe you're like, there's 40% of us make up the 9%. All right, but does that make sense? Think about that. The statistics are there. People want some change. They want different things, but they cannot accomplish it. And so that's where it was like, why? And this is the principle that's throughout the Bible, throughout Proverbs, throughout these things. If you don't have discipline, nothing will change. If you don't love discipline, there's a proverb that says, hang discipline around your neck, and all your ways will be fruitful. Right? Because that's like, if you love it, if you embrace it, if it's just part of your core, that, hey, you will be able to accomplish everything that you want. All right? And so as we go, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the important things I want to establish too is that there's a difference between discipline and being legalistic. Right? Having to earn your salvation, having to do all these rules, that was the old way. But the new way, obviously, Jesus covers us, but Jesus himself talks about discipline. Right? He talks about counting the cost. If you're going to lay a foundation, do all these things. He talks about when you're on the plow, never look back. Right? Like there's the old wineskins, right? Why would you pour new wine into an old wineskin? It ain't going to hold it. Right? There's all these ways that they continue to talk about discipline. Now that you know this better way of living, now that you know it's there, change. Put in the patterns that's necessary. Right? So in this part that says discipline takes hard work, there's a verse. It says 1 Timothy 6:11 through 12. And so this is the verse that says, fight the good fight of faith. And it says, but as for you, O man of God, flee these things. Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, gentleness. Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and about which you made the confession in the presence of many witnesses. So I underline this part. You made the good confession. And so a lot of times when we see discipline, we think of it as our parents disciplining us, telling us what's best for us, telling us what we need to do. Does that make right? When you hear the word discipline, is that what you think? Somebody's forcing you to do something. When I hear the word discipline, my butt kind of clenches, right, from the whipping. No, I'm just kidding. But does that make sense? That's usually what we think about discipline. But in actuality, discipline is you choose it. When you want something, you discipline your life to get it. Does that make sense? If you want a job, you discipline yourself to create a resume, do all that stuff, right? Submit it to all the companies. And how many companies you're going to send it to as many companies as you can. You can send it to all the companies you want to work with. Does that make sense? If you want to get into college, right, you have to discipline yourself and do college apps, essays, things like that, right? You guys aren't good at it, but, right, your parents have to stay on you, right? But does that make sense? Most of the time, if you want it, I'm going to get beat up by the youth later. That's okay. All right, but does that make sense? Usually when you want something, you know what you need to do to get it. And you go do it. If it's important enough to you, you're going to go do it. That's why the statistics on resolutions, that's what it's about. Those that stuck through it were resolutions that they really wanted, and they came up with a plan. And there's ways to do it, right? There's all the smart ways of doing it. But if it's something that you don't want, then those resolutions go away. That's what they're saying. Like, if it was something you thought was a good idealistic thing, or people told you should have it by this point, then yes, you tried it and you created a resolution, but obviously it fell apart. But if you want it, you're usually supposed to go get it. And so for Paul, as he's writing to Timothy, right, that's what he's telling him. Timothy, when you got baptized, you made a confession to everybody that this is how you want to live. That you want to leave the old way of life behind, and you want to live this new way. Nobody forced you to get baptized. Nobody forced you to take Christ. You chose this. You chose this new life. So this discipline, this way of living should be the easiest thing for you, because you confess that you wanted it. Does that make sense? And so for Christians, this is where it's especially those that have been baptized, this is that challenge. Wait a minute. Why do we feel like God is forcing us to change our behaviors, to do all these different things, when we're the ones that literally said, Jesus, we want to lay our lives down, throw us in the water, let our old lives be dead, and bring us up with new life? Does that make sense? We want to live the new life that you want us to live. This is my request. Help me. Right? So if we're the ones asking for it, why are we struggling to then live that life? See what I'm saying? So that's what I say. Like, it's really what we want. And so there's a lot of things behind it. Sometimes we don't see the goal, or sometimes we don't have the hope. Right? There's a lot of different factors. But if we don't love discipline, then that's on us. If we're the ones saying, I know the Bible has all the discipline there, but if I don't want it bad enough, then I'm not going to do it. Right? And so this is where it said, like, I'm hopefully it hits you. If I want these things and I fail at accomplishing them, then I need to work on my discipline. I need to work on getting what I want. I need to work on treating myself better. Right? As a kid, I learned all about discipline. Right? My dad was an ex-Army guy. He was very strict. Right? But at the same time, he always taught me the Bible. Right? Ever since I was 5, I told you, I've been reading the Bible over and over with my dad. And so one of the things that he taught me, right, especially looking at Joshua, where it tells you, God's like, if you read my command, if you meditate on my word day and night, if you don't veer to the left or the right, all your ways will be guided. All your ways will be prosperous. Right? If you read the end of Joshua, that's literally what Joshua tells the whole group of people. If we want to live in this promised land, if we want to be protected, God said this is the condition. Live this way and I'll give it to you all. And you'll have it always. If you don't want it, don't take it and live however you want. But you can't have both. What are you going to do? And that's where everybody says, we want this more than anything. We will live the way we're supposed to. That's our promise. And God's like, okay, I'm going to hold your words to you, against you. You said you want this, then fine, I'm going to hold you to it. And that's why you see the discipline that comes in the Old Testament, because it was what they wanted. Wasn't God saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. God's saying, if you want this life, if you want a life that has all these things, this is what you need to do to have it. And I'll help you. I'll be the firm hand that you need. But it's because you asked for it. Does that make sense? So for me, that's what I learned. And so I grew up in my dad's jewelry business, right? And so me and my older brother worked there all the time since we were kids. My older brother is 4 years older than me. And so he got to live out a lot of the experiences, try to break down all the walls and stuff like that, right? And so for him, my dad, was very strict on him. And so my brother's always like, our dad never let us do anything. And so my brother, he always had ideas, right? When he was in high school, he's like, we should do this differently, we should do that. And my dad's like, until you get an education on this field, we're not going to try your ideas. You only know how to do this one thing, or you only know how to do it yourself. You can't have all your employees do it. He's like, you need to learn everything before we ever make a change. And so my brother took that as, you don't want to listen to me, right? You don't respect me, all these things, right? You're stubborn. And so my older brother never got to change anything. right? Nothing, had no impact on the business as a kid. And so when I was in 8th grade, going into 9th grade, my dad, we used to be in San Jose. We opened a shop in Watsonville. So all summer I went down and, was painting the shop, doing all these things, getting it ready. And then I ended up doing some waxes. And so when you copy jewelry, you can make molds of it and make a wax and do all this other process, right? And so my dad used to train a lot of jewelers on how to do the work, and he was actually training this guy how to do waxes at the time. And so as my dad was training this guy for months, there was a customer that needed these seashells made into gold, right? The father wanted to give his son these golden shells because the mother died, and they were like, we need to replicate this to make it last forever, right? I want this kid to have a memory of his mom forever. And so, but if you know, seashells are very delicate, right? And they're very intricate. And so it's hard to copy what God made. And so as they're trying this for a couple hours, they can't get it to work, right? The machines and all this process, they couldn't get it to work. And so my dad's like, man, like, I don't have enough time to work on this, right? Like, he makes a lot more money fixing diamonds and all this other stuff, fixing the jewelry mount, all that stuff. And so he was like, I can't work on this. And so he was like, Joaquin, I'm going to show you how to do the basics of this machine. I want you to figure this out, right? It was about noon, and he's like, you got till 9 o'clock to figure this out, right? We'll be there all day. And so my dad knew that, number one, I was a problem solver. Number two, I would not quit, right? I'm going to do it till the ends. And number three, I have a high pain tolerance. Because when you do waxes, I know women could probably attest, like that hot wax on your hands, it burns, right? All that stuff, right? First time that hot wax hit my hands, I was like, no man is worth this, right? But in this machine, you have like super high pressured, hot, melting wax shooting out at you, right? All these different things. So that's why it makes it very difficult, especially when it's delicate, like all this hot wax will go. But you got to be able to hold it, do all these things, right? So my dad's like, Joaquin has a high pain tolerance. He'll see it through, right? This is not going to deter him. And so for 7-8 hours, that's what I did. Just kept practicing. Trying every different method, doing all these things, burning my hands over and over again, right? Until finally I got it. And I was able to make these 20 shells that we needed, right? So all the workers were like, oh, like Joaquin, right? Like he's the Mr. Wax. Like he just showed up his dad, right? Like his dad couldn't do it. And so my dad was like, hey, like that's pretty good that you got it, right? Especially as fast as you got it. He's like, how would you like to do these waxes and take over this part of our business, right? And I was like, what? Like really? Like I would love to do that. Right? He's like, okay, before you do, though, you got to read this 600-page book. Right? So as he gives me this huge manual of, because you got to know all the temperatures, right? You got to know how to melt gold, all this other stuff, melt silver, all those things. Like there's a lot of ratios and stuff you got to know. And so as he's giving this to me, right, what kid wants to read a 600-page book on their summer vacation? Nobody, right? Especially a training manual that's very dry and dull, right? There's nothing exciting about it. But I knew from my brother that if my dad always offered him, if you learn, you can do something different. Right? If not, you just do what your dad tells you. And so I also knew that the discipline of reading and learning something would help me. So I was like, okay, Dad, fine. I'll read it, all 600 pages. And that's exactly what I did. Right? I read it in the whole week, got everything, mastered it. And I was like, hey, Dad, I learned all these new techniques that we can improve the process that we do this thing. Like I can save you a lot of money down the road. And so my dad's, he's stubborn, yes, but he's like, okay, but you got to prove it. Do all the work, show me that it works, and then I'll think about changing my mind. So without any belief, knowing my dad's stubborn and knowing that he never listened to my brother, I still had hope that, hey, I could do it. I'm better than my brother, right? We know those younger siblings. We beat our older one. But so that's where I was like, I'm going to do it. So I spent another week building all these little things, right? Building all this stuff to show my dad. And after he saw it, he's like, all right, you did it. We're going to do this new way, and we're going to follow your way, right? So at 14, I was able to do my whole dad's wax business. That's why I told you guys, I started a lot of businesses when I was young, right? And so, but that's why, because it was the discipline. I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to do work that was fun. I wanted to play with huge torches, right? Imagine you're 14 melting, jewelry melts at a very high heat. Like it's crazy. Imagine you get to do that at 14. That's a lot of fun. Does that make sense? And so that's where I was like, this is what I want to do. This is something that I'm passionate about. So I'm willing to put in the work. It was hard work to read all that book. It was hard work to try all these things without any faith that it was going to work. But but I love discipline. I understood that what was waiting for me if I mastered it. Does that make sense? And so that's where I was like, because I had that as a kid, obviously it set my life up to cherish that. But it came from my foundation from the Bible. If you're disciplined, you'll be able to do all the things you want to do. When you try it, it's going to be hard at first, but it'll pay off down the road. Does that make sense? And so little by little, right, the discipline, if it takes a hold of your life, it's going to help you more and more and more. And so as we talk about this, not only is discipline important in just your personal life, but especially for your spiritual life, this is where the next point says, the value in this life and the next. when Paul is encouraging Timothy to train himself up in godliness, he's like, not only will it benefit you now, but for eternity. Right? That's what he's like, this is what it's about. Doing things that matter not only now, but for eternity. If you can master and love discipline now, you're going to be set for eternity. Right? Can you live a disciplined life? And so this is where in 1 Corinthians 9:24-25 it says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. And so Paul loves these images of training, right? Fighting, as fighters train, as athletes train, right? Everybody that's an athlete here, you understand what training means, right? How many of you like to lose? Nobody, right? How much is it sad when you lose? Are you angry when you lose? Right? So those of us that lost a lot, no, just right? It sucks to lose. I was looking at Caleb, not you. They just made nationals in his volleyball team, so he knows about winning, right? But that's what we see. For athletes that have lost, you know what you need to do to train, right? You know the pain that comes from losing, so you train even harder to avoid that. You have that motivation. Does that make sense? Because nothing feels better than winning. Nothing feels better than your team celebrating, doing all these things. Right? And so that's where Paul is trying to tell him. In life, you have to train. What can you do in life without any training? In order to get a job, you got to train in certain skills to be able to get that job. Right? In family life, you got to train. As students, you got to train. Does that make sense? Like, there's nothing in life that you can't train. But how many people love training? Nobody, right? And so that's where it was like, it's a funny thing. Why don't you love training? When it can literally make you better than at what you want to do, right? I know Aaron does wrestling. For us that are in the Army, any military person, if any of them ever did wrestling in high school, most of them are like wrestling pretty much was almost equivalent. Does that make sense? Wrestling, the only thing the Army adds is just danger, more being shot at. But every other wrestling training is that hard. So there's always a bond, a camaraderie where it's like, dude, we've been through it all. Like, we can take any type of training. Does that make sense? But especially for wrestling, like, you train so hard, but you only have like a 6-minute match, right? 3 2-minute rounds? What's that? Okay, yeah. So there's like 3 rounds, and so you can train all day. You train like crazy hours every single day, and in a 6-minute match, you're exhausted. 1 6-minute match after months of training, you're exhausted, right? And so that's where it was like training. If you enjoy it, if you love it, it just makes that 6 minutes easier. Does that make sense? It makes it more enjoyable. You have more fun training than you ever do in the match. Because when you wrestle with your friends, do all this other stuff, right? It's just a lot more fun. But there's no glory in training. Obviously, you only get glory when winning the match, right? But this is where we see, like, if you enjoy it, if you love it, if you know what it's for, you will embrace it. That's why there's all these Christian disciplines. That's why there's all these things where it's like, this will help you now and forever. And so that's why I said there's a difference between discipline and legalistic. We're not doing this to earn salvation. We're not doing this to make it, worth it, right? Or not to prove that we're worthy. It's literally to be able to live the life that Jesus wanted us to have. And so I'm purposely using no military ones because I don't want you guys to use that excuse like, well, that's because he's in the Army. That's why he had discipline. In my life, this is what has allowed me to have all the things that I want, all the things that God has presented for me. And so there was this one summer that when I was in seminary that I worked for 3 churches, did 3 mission trips, 3 VBSs, and did 3 summer camps, right? All while doing 3 classes in seminary. And so this was my first summer. This was 6 months out of the Army, 1 year out of Afghanistan, right? So obviously I was adjusting to this life, but I was so passionate about learning about church. I didn't live in church. I didn't grow up in it. I was so eager to understand what it was like to serve. The people that served churches did all this stuff. I didn't even know what VBS was. Does that make sense? I didn't know. So I know I did these mission trips, right? So at the time I had to do, it was 8 weeks of summer classes. Most students only took 1 for 3 semester hours. I took 3 classes for 8 hours, right? So it's going to be one at the beginning of the 8 weeks, one right in the middle, and then one at the end, right? So it's like from June to August. And so as I signed up for these classes, it was discipleship, worship in the church, and then educational ministry of the church. Two classes I really cared about, and then worship I had no idea about, right? I was like, I want to know about worship. I didn't know anything about it, right? And so as I signed up for these classes, I ended up meeting all these different churches. So at the time, I was at this black church in San Jose. I was going to do an internship there for my school requirement for 1 year going forward. But I met this church in San Francisco, right? They do this summer camp for all summer long, 8 weeks long. They had like kindergarten through 6th grade. And they were going to do a mission trip going to Connecticut and Vermont for their youth, right? But they needed volunteers. And there was also a church in Fremont called Alder Avenue Baptist Church right next to American. They were doing a VBS there, and then they were doing a VBS in Arizona at a reservation for Navajo kids, right? And so as all these churches needed help, as I ran into and met them, the San Francisco church was like, none of our adults have driver's license, right? I was like, what? Like they're all like 25, 27, none of them have driver's license. And they're like, well, you don't need it in the city. And so, but anywhere you go out, right, to drive youth around and do mission trips, they need drivers. They need people that be able to rent cars and stuff like that. And so I was like, I'll go. If you pay for my ticket, I'll go. I'll drive. I'll do whatever you need me to do, right? I'm willing to volunteer. And so in order to meet these youth, I was like, I'll even volunteer at the summer camp. That way they get to meet me before we go off for a week, right? Because these kids are going to be alone with me, driving in cars and doing all this stuff. I was like, that's going to be very awkward if they don't know me. So I'll do a week at this church. I'll do a week at your summer camp. When I met the church in Fremont, they were looking for help because our campus was around here. And so I was like, yeah, I can do the VBS at your church. And they're like, oh, great. And so I was like, what's this thing about you guys needing people for Arizona? And my school at the time had a campus in Arizona, in Phoenix. And they're like, oh, we were hoping students from that campus would volunteer because it's right down the street. They can help. And they're like, but we got no volunteers from Arizona. So I was like, I can help. And they're like, what? I was like, yeah, I'll do the VBS in Fremont. And then I had my truck at the time. I was like, you guys also said you need help getting supplies, all the supplies there, right? The VBS setup and all that. I was like, I'll just load up on my truck after class and I'll drive down there. Drive all your stuff and meet you there in like a 16-hour period. Right? I was like, I can do that. I'm willing. And then at the black church, I had to do the VBS there and I had to do another adult study for a week. Does that make sense? So all these leaders are like, man, that's great that you want to volunteer. But they're like, how are you going to do this? You're doing triple what normal students supposed to. You're working with triple churches, triple mission trips, all this other stuff. How are you going to do this in an 8-week period? Maybe we shouldn't let you. And I was like, excuse me? I was like, let me tell you how I'm doing this. And so I was like, I've already started. I already have the date, 6 weeks out of when that class starts. I need to start training. I need to do my physical training. I need to eat. Do all this stuff to make sure I can raise my energy levels. Before that class starts, the week before, I'll read all 4 books. That way I don't need to read them. I'll be able to write my papers that week. Then I'll be able to go on I'll do the summer camp the next week, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Then I'll do the mission trip the next week, right? Then I'll start the next class. Do that class. We'll have 1 week off for 4th of July weekend. I'll read those books those 4 books over that weekend. I'll write the paper. Then I'll do the Fremont VBS. Then I did my black church, right? Then I did the last class. And I was like, okay, I can read the books while I'm down in Arizona. And literally within a 10-week period, I did every single one of them. And I walked away with 2 job offers, right? And so I was already working at the black church. But all these people were like, how could you do this? And I was like, because I had the discipline. I had the schedule. I didn't budge. I made sure everything was lined up because this is what I want to do. This is what I love to do. This is what I'm curious about. Right? And so I was like, I'll eat right. I'll train right. Right? That's how you know I'm serious when I'm eating vegetables every single day because I know I need to do what I need to do. Does that make sense? I know how to work my body. That's what Paul says. You know how to train your body. I knew how to sleep right. I knew how to do all these things. And I had the faith that God would give me the strength to do it. And so because of that, I was able to do all the things that I wanted to do. But more importantly, this is the things that God wanted me to do. Right? Those 3 classes were like my most foundational classes. The discipleship one, the teacher, it was phenomenal. The books we read, the people we talked to. But even for him, he was like, discipleship is more about how you live every single day. Model your behavior, and that's what you need to do the most. And he did it for our class. He did all these cool things. And that guy just rocked my world about how to disciple people. Coming from the Army, I did not know how to do that. Does that make sense? So it was such a great foundational class. The worship class, I didn't know what worship was. But I really enjoyed reading the material, understanding the biblical background, all this other stuff, right? It opened my heart to learning about worship and actually being passionate about it, right? Trying to seek out. That's what. And then the last class was educational ministry of the church. I shared with you guys that there was a teacher that did all these games, right? That really opened my eyes to use all the gifts that I was given, This was that class. It was at the very end of the hardest 8 weeks of my life. Does that make sense? But I didn't give up. I saw God saying, this is a great class for you. I didn't know what was in that class, but that class set me up for my future. Does that make sense? And that's where I was like, if I did not have the discipline, if I did not do that, there's no way I could have done all those things. But it was God knew what I wanted. He already established discipline in my life. And he's like, let's go. What's to stop us? Does that make sense? And so that's what I'm saying. Like, not only was that great for my life then, but all those classes, all that time, all those leaders that I got to meet. I met so many leaders on all these trips that I went. It was so great to hear their passion, so great to hear how they wanted to serve God, all the things that they were doing. For somebody that was fresh out of the military, that had no experience about church, it was like I got thrown in full immersion. Does that make sense? I got to really know what people were like that served God. And they were all amazing across the board. And I was only able to accomplish it because God already established this discipline. If you put the hard work in, the rewards pay off over and over and over again. The rewards pay off now and forever. Does that make sense? And so that's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, if you really want to treat yourself right, then love discipline. Love it. Love it. Go after it. It's going to help you go after the things that you want to have. And so that's where I put some of the disciplines that are in the Bible, right? The Bible reading. It helps you keep God's words in your mind and heart to be able to resist temptation, doubts, fears, loneliness. It establishes your worthiness, your purpose. Being able to meet with fellow scripture memorization helps keep God's, oh my bad, I mixed it up. Bible reading helps you know the heart of God, guides you to shape your heart like God so you always know what to do. Scripture memorization helps keep God's words in your mind and heart. The discipline of meeting with fellow believers, never have to feel alone. Don't have to figure out God's will on our own. Different perspectives help you see more of God. Other gifts can help you in what you are trying to achieve. Journaling helps keep track of answered prayers and God's movements in your life. Discipline of quiet time allows to try and hear God more and removes distractions. Discipline of rest allows your body to heal so you can have more strength. Let your mind be rejuvenated so it can grow and be useful in accomplishing the things you want. Worship time at home allows to keep thinking of things God wants, also can help you hear from God more. Giving to the needy is a discipline. Helps keep us content with what we have, helps us remember everything we have is because of God. Also helps others in need so they don't have to think God has forgotten about them. The discipline of forgiving others helps keep our hearts pure, doesn't hinder future relationships because of mistrust, sets us free from the pain. How we forgive here is how we will be forgiven by God. And then the last discipline, examine ourselves first. Ensures we are not hypocrites, helps us find grace and mercy, keeps us focused on ensuring we live the way we are supposed to. These are like a handful of the disciplines that I found, right? But most of us are like, oh, that's such a chore to do. But in the actuality, it's a discipline that helps keep you strong, helps keep you faithful, helps keep you joyful, content, all these things. Does that make sense? So why do we see it as a chore? Why do we see it as I'm forced to do this? When in actuality, God's like, if you want all these things in your life, you want abundant life, you want to be free, joyful, content, try these things to make sure you can. Does that make sense? It's on you. It's your choice. And so it's so funny that we see it as force. But in actuality, it's always like, hey, if you said you want to live this way, here it is. Right? I actually went through the whole New Testament just to prepare the sermon. Right? That's the discipline I have. If I'm going to teach it, if I'm going to find the theme that God has, I'm going to look for it in every single word. Right? I have my little notepad here. I used to use regular legal pads, so I upgraded to these ones called Oxford. Right? Or I don't know, something like that. But it has like you can do notes, like little clues and then summaries. Right? But basically every single page from the whole New Testament, every book, that's just this week. Does that make sense? Like over and over, and I write them down so I can help remember them. As I'm speaking, they can come to me as well, right? But just writing it, doing cues, because that's the discipline. Am I not gonna be blessed by reading the whole thing? Is that right? Like, am I gonna lose any of my life if I read the whole Bible this week? I want to live a good life. I want to have discipline. I want to be stronger, right? I want to have all the things I want. So why not read it so I'm motivated for this next year? Does that make sense? I'm not just preaching to you. I'm preaching to myself. Right? And so that's what we say. It's something that if you really want it, nobody should ever have to force you. All right? And so we're going to end in the last part where it says, on the back page, it says, train yourself for godliness. And so hopefully you see, right? You know what you need in your life. You know what areas you want God to move in or shape and do all these things. Or if you're just trying to practice discipline for something in your future life, right? Practice a spiritual discipline to help build up that love of discipline. And so one of them is commit to reading the Bible in 1 year. Another is read one psalm every day. I gave the youth this book that has like all these psalms over Christmas break with summaries. Anybody got to start reading it? No, you got to. All right, but that's the we're trying to push, right? Trying to do different things. But that's one you can do. Read a psalm every single day. There's 150 psalms, right? You can basically do it once or twice a year. Read one proverb each day for the month. There's like 32 proverbs, if I remember correctly, right? You can literally read one every day. Not a very hard discipline to have. Read the Bible before you go to bed every night. Something very simple. But establish that pattern. Start your day with a worship song and a prayer thanking God for that day. Just a little small discipline. Commit to taking a Sabbath. Complete rest for at least half a day. If you know what you want, and most of the things that we want in life needs rest. Right? Most of us want to study or do all these things. If you don't rest well enough, you don't retain the material. You got to study harder. Isn't this a great principle of the Bible? The more you rest, the better you'll retain the less you have to study. You know it, right? Parents are like, what? That's what the Bible basically teaches. The more you rest, the less you have to study. The better your brain will be to retain it. Right? If you have no worries, you don't have to worry about the test. Your brain's easier to just go through the material faster and faster and faster and faster. Isn't that cool, right? That's why I love the Bible. It's like, follow God's principles, you have to do less. I'm like, God, I love you. God, I love you. Right? But that's the principle, rest. So try that. Practice fasting. Right? So Jesus talks about fasting. He talks about they'll fast after he's gone, right? This is a discipline he talked about, where especially to help develop self-control. So for many of you, you can fast from social media for a day, right? Using technology for a day. Or, you can do food. Does that make sense? But it's meant to say, can I live without this? Can I control this? There's these extra verses down there where it talks about like being slaves to things or being free of it, right? So it's like, can any of you ever not use your phone for a whole day? What do you think? Right? Can any of you, right? Most of you are like, no, I want, not even just social media, but just not use your phone for the day. Think about, that's an easy challenge, right? I've lived like 2 years of my life without phones. It was fantastic. The 2 of my best years. They were separate years. I wish I could do it more often, right? But think about that, because like even the lights affect your sleep, right? The blue light, all that stuff. So it's like, if you really want to rest, don't use it for a day. Practice that. Practice being able to just find, obviously you can use that time for God, but even just to go out, do different things. Getting sunlight, all that stuff helps your, the vitamin D, right? All that gives you more energy, things like that, lifts up your mood, all that stuff. But most of us won't do it, right? You can practice navigation without a GPS. Just find things, find it. Does that make sense? But it's something to practice. If you enjoy it, we're like, man, I need to try more and more things. But this is where we see you have to train yourself for godliness. This is what matters. This is what's going to help you now and for eternity. And so I'll end with this. I did this challenge with the youth, right? So I told you guys I did the create the list during Thanksgiving, right? So basically I created a challenge for the youth that from December to June, if they share the 7 things that they're thankful for every week, they get all-you-can-eat dim sum at this really nice top restaurant in the Bay Area. Does that make sense? And so if you go there, it's kind of expensive, right? And so most of the time I do things with the youth, only 4 or 5 of them ever actually sign up or do stuff, right? So I'm like, I could afford 4 or 5 of them, right? That's like maybe $200, $300. After I presented this challenge and shared pictures of the dim sum, they ended up having like 14 to 16 of them start doing this, right? And so as the first time I saw, I was like, oh man, like that's gonna be an expensive meal, right? It's gonna be probably over $1,000. And this is my money. This is my personal challenge for them. Does that make sense? So it's $1,000. It's probably going to be $1,000 in June. So as I'm looking at that, I'm like, okay, from now till June, I have to eat 1 less breakfast out, and I have to eat 1 less dinner out, so I can start saving that money to be able to take you guys. Does that make sense? But that's the discipline that's needed. Number 1, right? If I'm going to I'll be able to afford it, I got to have the discipline. And so if you know me, I love throwing out crazy ideas, but I'm willing to do whatever discipline to make that crazy idea come to fruition. Right? So I will gladly sacrifice 1 or 2 meals a week. That way I can afford this meal. Right? Because for most of them, is the prize of, or the richness that comes from doing this weekly is a discipline. They're learning a discipline in one of the most easy ways possible. Right? But they're also learning how to be more thankful, how to be more content. And at the same time, we have this challenge. We're like, how do you see God through these blessings every week? So they're always asking, praying, how can I see God more? This was my best way to do it. This is how I saw God making this happen. Does that make sense? And so it's like discipline. It's very easy. It's fruitful, rewarding. Right? So we're only doing it for 6 months, but imagine if they could do it for life. Imagine if all of us could do something like that for life. If we could always reflect once a week of what we're thankful for with God, you're going to tell me your life would not be richer. You would not have more joy. You would not be more content. Right? Because that's what we talk about. If you can't establish contentment in this life, imagine when you have eternity with God. You think you'll be content if you've never learned how to do it? Does that make sense? That's why we see like the whole devil, rebellion, all this other. Why do you think? They never learn contentment. So this is where there's a lot. We go very deep in this topic, right? But I'm trying to keep it short. But that's the point. What we do now pays off now and for eternity. Why would we not want to start practicing these disciplines? So hopefully you guys keep doing it, right? And some of you guys I make fun of. This is your best way to get back at me. Where it's like I'm gonna make him spend his hard-earned money but even for myself, like as I ask God, right, how can I lead them, or how all the challenges of the job. Fridays nights are really great, right? It's such a spiritual high, emotional high, where it's like, man, so much fun to be with them every single Friday. And so obviously the next day, Saturdays are rough. Saturdays can be rough sometimes, right? Because number one, I've given all I have, all my energy. But at the same time, just to have like a lull or a dullness, right? And so for me, that's where I was like, I need a discipline on Saturday, God. I was like, God, what can I do on Saturdays to help kind of bridge that gap? Because I know Sunday is going to be good, I'm going to see you, but man, it's such a dip. And so when God gave me this idea, that's where he was like, read them every Saturday night. Go out on your patio, do your little fire, worship, and read their list every single week. See how their lives were, see how God's moving. And it's a great, I enjoy it every Saturday. Caleb was cracking up because I was like, yeah, I was talking to him about what he put on his list. He's like, you actually read them? Right? It's like, yeah, of course. Like, that's why I put them there. Does that make sense? But that's where we see a discipline, just little disciplines. I'm always going to try whatever it takes for them to see God. That's my discipline. Whatever crazy idea I got to do, I know God's like, you got the discipline to see it through. So I'll throw out any crazy idea. And I already have the background to do it. And that's where God's like, because you have that background, now you get to see your other prayer answered of being able to have something on Saturday. That means that you're still able to rest, you're still able to, enjoy, rest your body, but then you're able to rejuvenate your spiritual energy that you lost over that day. Does that make sense? And so that's why I see when people are like, why do I need discipline? Why is that? It's like, don't you see the benefits of it? Don't you see the rewards in every single way? It can creep in and just show up so many different ways. And it's like, why would you not want it for yourself, knowing what it accomplishes? And so I'll leave that for you, right? These last applications. Right? List out as you're doing your resolutions this year, right? List out all the resolutions you have for the next year, no matter how big or small. Evaluate if they're the things God wants you to have. Then pray that God will give you clarity on all the things you should pursue. Ask Jesus for the strength to continue to grow your faith and help you live the abundant life he wants you to have. And the last one, choose one of the ways to train your godliness over this next year. Then give all you have to complete it. I said that discipline is not legalism, right? If you know Jesus and you look at his life, he is the most disciplined person there is. He was willing to do whatever it takes. He was willing to take every single step to come make sure we're safe. When he lived here, he made sure he stayed restrained. He made sure he stuck to the plan, right? He made sure he was always under self-control. Does that make sense? He was willing to go to the cross knowing what it would do. He was disciplined to make sure that he'll always be there for us, right? Everything about his life is about discipline. And so if you're really thinking like, I want to live this life that he's given me, you should see it as this is one of the greatest opportunities to connect with Jesus and be closer to him. Because this is what he strives for. This is what he believes in. This is what he died for. And so that's why as I'm trying to do all these disciplines, all these things, yeah, I have bad days or I have times I don't have the strength, but that's where I could just keep leaning on him over and over. That's the best discipline that I have in my life. When I can't, when I'm done, when I'm out, I can look to him and it'll always get done. Does that make sense? I'll always be lifted up. I'll always find the strength. I'll always find the faith. I'll always find the hope. Because that is the best discipline that I was established as a kid and that God has put my whole life. My main discipline is I always go to him first. And no matter what, my life is always what it needs to be. And so that's what I'm saying. Like the discipline of little things, they matter and they build up to where you have that discipline of always seeking Christ. And if that's your discipline, if this builds up to that discipline, then you have nothing to worry about for the rest of your life. And so please join me as we close in prayer.